Well, I think it's always been known that our government has funded the change in administrations, if we can say it politely, of other governments. But isn't it borderline treason when the taxpayer when organizations entrusted with protecting our country are now undermining our own government?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're trying to do regime change, illegal, if you're weaponizing DHS, FBI, CISA, that's treasonous regime change activities redirected, that you developed abroad, that we developed abroad for regime change, directed against the American people and our representatives. I mean, it's shocking, and we still haven't dealt with it as a country.
Mr. Schellenberger, last Congress, you helped expose censorship grants at the National Science Foundation, specifically known as Track F grants. Can you tell us more about those censorship activities conducted associated with these grants?
Yeah, this was the National Science Foundation's Track F was basically to create censorship tools that would become sort of the middleware to, such as NewsGuard, for example, is the most famous of which, or the Global Disinformation Index. The idea is to essentially impose on people's systems, either directly through their computers or adopted by social media companies, a set of tools that would allow centralized authorities to decide what the truth was and filter it for people. It's a horrifying program. All of Track F, in my view, should be eliminated, and I think there should be an investigation to figure out what in the world were they thinking when they created a program to basically have the taxpayers subsidize the creation of elaborate censorship tools that included the use of AI in creating that censorship.
So taxpayers are actually paying for the government to help private companies censor their free speech.
Yeah, and then the idea was that they were just going to, give these tools to Facebook and X and others to use, or to give them to Microsoft and others to use. It's awful stuff. And by the way, it also came from Department of Defense. So much of those NSF grants are sort of recycling older DARPA DoD projects.
When I coached T-ball, the kids shared helmets. And so occasionally there'd be an outbreak of lice, and we'd comfort the parents by saying it's not a sin to get lice, it's a sin to keep lice. So with these Track F grants, later today I plan to reintroduce my bill to eliminate those. And I want to make a plea to the White House and anybody in the executive branch who's listening, or anybody at DOJ, you need to go after these Track F grants and defund anything that says mis, dis, or malinformation. Those are all, in my opinion, Orwellian terms. Also, we have an omnibus coming up in March where I'm scared to death we're going to refund all of these things. We're basically going to feed the lice that were contracted in the last administration. But this isn't just limited to NSF grants. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, within DHS is a flagrant violator of free speech. It had things like election integrity partnership. Mr. Taibbi, can you tell us anything about this? What's going on at DHS or CISA?
Yeah, so CISA was as we found in the Twitter files, the election integrity partnership was run by Stanford. They had 4 partners, including the Center for an Informed Public, University of Washington, Graphica, the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Labs, but they partnered with CISA and the Global Engagement Center at the State Department, and we found in the Twitter files, and also Chairman Jordan also found some emails basically saying that this EIP project was founded at the behest of DHS. This essentially EIP was a CISA-created project, or it was a CISA sort of sponsored project. And it was, it's essentially a content moderation removal operation that was sponsored by the American taxpayer.
Another example of American taxpayers unwittingly, without knowing, funding their own violation or deprivation of their First Amendment rights. Mr. Schellenberger, can you explain how you traced USAID funding that served as the basis for whistleblower report in 2019, which led to the impeachment of President Trump?
Sure. Well, you may remember that the so-called whistleblowers in the White House was actually a CIA analyst, and in that whistleblower's complaint, which led to the impeachment, one of the central pieces of evidence was created by a USAID funded and controlled organization called the OCCRP. And we have another piece out today about how it participated in the Russiagate hoax as well, creating essentially very important information leading to that. So, I mean, you have in USAID a much larger fund of money and a much broader strategy for information control that included censorship, but also, as I mentioned, taking control of investigative journalism really worldwide. I mean, its ambitions were, amazing. So, yeah, I mean, that's an agency. When we saw that get shut down by DOJ, I thought that was completely appropriate. If there's something in there that it was doing that's valuable, then you could refund it later. But my view, same thing with CISA, death penalty for organizations that participated in violations of the First Amendment like CISA. Cybersecurity is an extremely important function. It shouldn't be contaminated and undermined by censorship activities.
Well, I think it's always been known that our government has funded the change in administrations, if we can say it politely, of other governments. But isn't it borderline treason when the taxpayer when organizations entrusted with protecting our country are now undermining our own government?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're trying to do regime change, illegal, if you're weaponizing DHS, FBI, CISA, that's treasonous regime change activities redirected, that we developed abroad for regime change, directed against the American people and our representatives. I mean, it's shocking, and we still haven't dealt with it as a country.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired. I'd like to introduce into the record, or ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record, an article in Newsmax, Schellenberger, USAID paid for Trump impeachment effort, dated February 6, 2025.
Without objection.